You are sitting at a restaurant table waiting for someone who is running late. 10 minutes, no phone, no intentional distraction. Just the table, the background noise of the other patrons, the waiter passing by, the sound of silverware. How long can you stay like that? 3 minutes, 2? There is something that begins to stir inside you that is not hunger and is not impatience. It is a nameless restlessness, as if the silence were an accusation. As if doing nothing were evidence of something wrong, a character flaw, proof that you are falling behind. You look around. Everyone has something in hand. Everyone seems to be somewhere beyond that moment. And you realize you do not know exactly where you are. That discomfort you felt, that existential itch of someone who has stopped while the world seems not to, is the entry point to one of the most radical ideas philosophy has ever produced. And it is more than 2,000 years old. You are not strange for feeling that. The sensation that emptiness is dangerous is not individual weakness. It is cultural calibration. You were trained for it with a precision that no conscious training program could achieve, because it happened by osmosis, by repetition, by total immersion in a world that treats silence as a symptom. Silence on your calendar, a popularity problem. Silence on your projects, an ambition problem. Silence on your news, a relevance problem. And the most corrosive of all, inner silence. That moment when you stop chasing and simply exist, that one is treated as the most suspicious of all. Because in a culture where everyone is running, whoever stopped either fled or gave up. It is not just you who feels this. It is a structure, and structures have mechanisms, and mechanisms can be seen. Think about a Sunday afternoon with no obligations, not the Sunday with to-do lists. The completely free Sunday, the one that in theory you always wanted. What does it feel like? For most people, it does not arrive as rest. It arrives as pressure in a different format. Rest has to be earned. Emptiness has to be justified. And some inner voice begins taking inventory. What did you do this week? Was it worth it? Compared to whom? That voice is not your conscience. It is structural comparison operating in silent mode. It does not need an external audience to function. It has already been internalized so completely that it runs without needing any new fuel. You carry other people's measuring stick inside you and apply it to yourself even when you are completely alone. The silence is not empty. It is full of voices that are not yours. And that is exactly where Epicurus enters, not as comfort, but as a scalpel. The question is not why silence makes you uncomfortable. The question is what the silence would be revealing if you let it. Epicurus was born in 341 BC on Samos and did something that the philosophers of his era considered scandalous. He bought a garden on the outskirts of Athens and left the city, not to meditate, not to escape, to create the conditions for a philosophical experiment that would last a lifetime. The Epicurean garden was not a spiritual retreat. It was a laboratory. Epicurus wanted to understand what people truly desire when the gaze of others is removed from the equation. When there is no marketplace, no agora, no visible social hierarchy, what remains? The answer he found was unsettling. Most of what human beings call desire is not desire. It is echo. Epicurus did not propose the garden for aesthetic reasons. He proposed it because he understood something that contemporary neuroscience is only beginning to formalize. Desire contaminated by comparison does not reveal what you want. It reveals what you are afraid of not having. Those are completely different things. Imagine two archers. One trains alone in an open field, the other always trains with an audience. Both improve. But what is being refined in each of them is different. The first calibrates his technique in relation to the target. The second calibrates his technique in relation to what the audience finds impressive. Over time, if you ask them to describe what they want to achieve, the answers will be structurally distinct. One talks about the target, the other talks about the looks he receives. Now generalize that across an entire life. Since childhood, you learned to want in public, to desire with an audience, to calibrate aspiration by the thermometer of external approval. Not because you were weak or manipulable, but because that is how desires are formed in social creatures, through contagion, through comparison, through relative positioning. The problem is not that this happened. The problem is that you never noticed it was happening. Your desires feel like yours. They have the texture of conviction, the weight of certainty. But Epicurus would ask a simple, clinical, almost brutal question. If nobody knew you had this, would you still want it? That question has no comfortable answer. There is a difference between wanting something and wanting to be seen wanting something. Most people have never made that distinction because they have never had enough silence to make it. Epicurus identified this as the root of almost all unnecessary human suffering, pursuing desires that are not yours as if they were, spending real energy in a direction that was never yours. The rent is paid in years, and the contract was never consciously signed. You do not need anyone around you in order to compare yourself. The comparison has already been internalized so deeply that it operates in autonomous mode. In a closed room, with no external reference whatsoever, other people's measuring stick is still there, measuring, classifying, diagnosing. This is not paranoia. It is the predictable result of decades of social calibration. The measuring stick no longer needs an owner to function. It has become part of the architecture of how you perceive yourself. Silence is dangerous for systems that depend on continuous comparison, because in silence, hierarchy loses its sharpness. Without knowing where others are, you do not know where you stand in relation to them, and that dissolves the entire evaluation structure. The discomfort you feel in emptiness is not existential, it is structural. The comparison system momentarily collapsing for lack of fuel. What you call the anxiety of silence is technically withdrawal from relative positioning. The Epicurean concept of ataraxia is almost always translated as tranquility or peace of mind, and that translation is a betrayal of the original diagnosis. Ataraxia is not the absence of tension. It is the absence of disturbance caused by desires that are not yours. It is the radical distinction between what you want because it was born in you and what you want because you absorbed it from the environment without authorizing it. Epicurus was not proposing peace. He was proposing clarity. Those are completely different states. The common reading of Epicureanism is escapist, withdraw from the world, live simply, avoid pain. That reading inverts the diagnosis. The Epicurean garden was not escape. It was a controlled laboratory. You remove the variable of comparison to see what remains. What is left when the social hierarchy is not visible? What do you desire when nobody is accounting for your desires? These are not abstract philosophical questions. They are questions that most people have never been able to genuinely ask because they have never created the conditions to hear them. This is where the diagnosis deepens and becomes uncomfortable. You have already heard the idea that we are social animals. It is usually used as an explanation for gregarious behavior, for the need for belonging, for the fear of solitude. It is a true description. But it has a consequence that is rarely named explicitly. If we are social animals, our desire apparatus was built to function in a social context. Human desire is relationally calibrated by design. This means that structural comparison is not a pathological deviation. It is the normal functioning of a system that evolved to operate that way. The problem is not that you compare yourself. The problem is that you live in an environment where the surface of comparison is infinite and the period of silence between comparisons is close to zero. Epicurus proposed the garden at a time when comparison had natural physical limits. You could only compare yourself with those around you, with those who shared your physical space of existence. The agora closed. The marketplace had hours. The visibility of other people's lives had geographical boundaries. Today, The surface of comparison has no edge, no time zone, no closing time. There is no moment when others stop. There is no spontaneous silence from other people's lives. It has to be actively created by deliberate decision against the tide of a system that has a structural interest in keeping comparison alive. Epicurus's garden today is not a place. It is a practice of radical interruption. And most people have never practiced it because they did not understand what they were interrupting. Here is the mechanism the system does not want you to see clearly. The silence you fear is not emptiness. It is diagnosis. When comparison stops, when you remove other people's measuring stick, when the surface of relative positioning is temporarily erased, what appears is not peace. What appears is the real list, the desires that survive without an audience, the aspirations that continue making sense when nobody is keeping score. And the list is almost always shorter than the list you had been pursuing. Not because you want less, but because much of what you called wanting was, in Epicurus's language, a kenotic desire, an empty desire without a bottom that cannot be satisfied because it was not born from a real need. It was born from a comparison, and comparisons have no endpoint. You cannot satisfy someone else's desire that you internalized as your own because the measuring stick always changes hands. The invisible mechanism is this: modern structural comparison has hijacked the philosophical void. It took the space that Epicurus identified as the seat of authentic wanting and converted it into a symptom. You do not remain in silence because silence has been recoded as exclusion. Standing still is falling behind. Being quiet is being absent from the race. And the race, by definition, has no finish line, only participants further ahead and participants further behind. You do not fear the silence. You fear what the silence would reveal if you let it. Now you see the mechanism. The discomfort you feel in silence is not a sign that you are losing something. It is a sign that the comparison system is entering withdrawal. The measuring stick you internalized over decades needs continuous fuel, knowing where others are in order to calculate where you are. When that fuel is removed, the system goes into alarm. Epicurus was not the first to notice that desires can be contaminated by the gaze of others. But he was perhaps the first to take that perception all the way to its most radical philosophical consequence. If most of your desires were formed by comparison, then most of what you call aspiration is a loan that was never consciously taken out. It is not your fault. It is structure, but structure can be seen, and what can be seen can, at the very least, be questioned. The world will not look the same after this. Not because you are going to change your life, not because you're going to build a garden and leave the city, but because now that you have seen the mechanism, it ceases to be invisible. And visible things operate differently from invisible things. Every time you feel the discomfort of silence, that existential itch of someone who has stopped while the world seems to keep moving, you will know you are not feeling emptiness. You are feeling the comparison system asking for fuel that you are refusing in that moment to provide. Every time the list of things you want seems endless and urgent and vital, you will have a new question available, not as a solution, but as a mirror. Which of these things would still be on the list if nobody knew you had it? Epicurus spent years in that experiment, and what he discovered was not that people want little. It was that people rarely know what they want because they have never created the necessary conditions of silence to find out. Authentic wanting is not less intense than comparative wanting. It is more precise. It has a specific address. It does not dissipate across infinite surfaces of relative positioning. The difference between aspiration and echo is not in the intensity, it is in the origin. If you spent 30 days knowing absolutely nothing about how any other person is living, no news of anyone else's achievements, no visibility into the trajectories of anyone around you, What would you want on the 30th day? Not what you think you should want, not what you wanted before you started. What would survive the complete deprivation of comparison? That question has no easy answer, and be suspicious of anyone who offers one. Epicurus spent an entire lifetime in the garden and still did not propose a list of correct desires to replace the contaminated ones, because that was not the point. The point was to create the conditions of silence where the question could, for the first time, be truly heard. Silence is not on the other side of noise as a reward. It is available now, in this gap, in this interval, if you can resist the immediate impulse to fill it with yet another surface of comparison. What is waiting on the other side of the discomfort you feel when you stop is not failure. It is the question you never let finish forming. Epicurus did not offer an answer. He offered a method, and the method begins with one single thing: creating enough space for the question to be heard before it is smothered by other people's measuring stick. Antidote does not offer a solution. It offers a diagnosis. If something here named a tension you already felt but could not articulate, what do you see now that you did not see before? Write it in the comments, not as an answer, as a continuation.